Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. My name is Mike Unger, and I'm going to be one of your hosts for the day. The club's purpose is to engage the power of diverse, worldwide talent to advance the deployment of Industry 4.0. Our club accomplishes this by hosting events like this, broadcasts, talking about Industry 4.0 with interesting individuals, and we also do some live programming as well. As I mentioned, I'm Mike Unger. I'm the CEO of the Industry 4.0 Club. My background is I've got over 35 years of experience in manufacturing with Michelin in a variety of continuous improvement, operations, finance, and HR roles. Today, we're launching a series of broadcasts entitled Lean Industry 4.0, Operational Excellence Meets Technology. Hosting this series with me is Tim Stuart. Tim is president of Visual Decisions. Tim, would you please introduce yourself as well?
Sure. As Mike mentioned, my name is Tim Stewart. I'm president of Visual Decisions. My background is also from manufacturing. I worked at Black & Decker and Cummins Engine coming out of school. I moved over to the software and consulting side of things about 20 plus years ago now. I spent time as a lean manufacturing consultant and then progressed into the data side of things and using data from the shop floor to drive improvements. And along the way, picked up on the fact that leadership is absolutely critical in that process and driving that culture, driving the process improvement, as well as helping drive adoption of the technology itself. So excited to talk about that topic today.
Thanks, Tim. So our broadcast today is entitled Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast, the importance of leadership in Industry 4.0 deployment. Our guest today for this first broadcast in our series is Justin Brennen. Justin describes himself as a people-first leader and coach in strategic planning, operational excellence, and lean transformations. He has over 10 years of work experience in operations, maintenance, and project management, ranging from the shop floor to the C-suite. Justin has consistently delivered performance improvement with a focus on sustainability. He's also experienced in coordinating multidisciplinary teams to drive successful improvements in many areas. He's currently the Vice President of Operations for Medical Products Laboratories Incorporated. Prior to this role, he worked as the Director of Operational Excellence for Renaissance Lakewood and spent nearly 6 years with McKinsey. Justin is a chemical engineer with a bachelor's degree from Drexel University. So welcome, Justin. We're glad that you could join us.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here, and thanks, Tim, as well.
So, Tim, I know you started already, but can you do a bit more and share a bit more background about why this topic is important, why this topic of leadership really matters? Tim, you're on mute.
Thank you. When people approach Industry 4.0, they tend to focus on the technology side of things and take a lot of time focusing in on what are the technologies they want to put in place, who are the vendors they want to work with, getting that technology implemented and collecting data correctly in the first place. But I use the example of an IoT device, a Fitbit, all the time, where I've been wearing a Fitbit for 11 years now and have gained 20, 30 pounds during that time. And it's not the fault of the Fitbit. Fitbit's a great IoT device, collects data, pushes it to the cloud, uses AI, turns it into footsteps and heartbeats and sleeping patterns and so forth. Presents pretty charts and graphs. But if you don't change your behaviors, if you don't fundamentally do something different tomorrow than you do today, you're not going to lose the weight that you're hoping to. And it's the same thing in business. You can put the IoT devices, you can put other Industry 4.0 devices out there to collect the data. And you can produce all the pretty charts and graphs, you can use AI. But if your people don't fundamentally do something differently tomorrow than they do today, you're not going to achieve the gains that you're hoping for. So as part of the Industry 4.0 implementation, you have to have a mindset of not only what is the technology that you want to put in place, but what are the process changes, what are the cultural and behavioral changes that you want to get in place with your people as part of that digital transformation. And so I strongly believe that starts at the top. A lot of the most successful projects that I've seen, whether it's the plant leadership or the corporate leadership, really takes a leading role in utilizing the information themselves and having that trickle down throughout the organization.
Super. Well, thanks for getting us started on that. So, with that sort of as a backdrop, Justin, I know you've led operations in your company for several years now. So, how do you create culture? How do you create culture in a way that will enhance what you're trying to accomplish moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, from my perspective, it starts out with what kind of culture do you want to build? You have to define what you're looking to build, how you want it to behave and operate, and obviously, no one answer is fit for every single company out there. So, for me, coming into MPL, I had to kind of get a feel for the company and where we're at right now. We're a smaller company, around 200 employees. A lot of people have been here for a long time. So, as I joined the company, it was pretty clear to me that if I did anything to make it very hierarchical or very overly structured, it would be a wasted exercise entirely. So respecting what was here and understanding that, I kind of stepped back and said, let's aim to build something that's a little more collaborative, a little more open and honest in terms of where we're failing, and really try to make it one of those places where we know we all have to wear a lot of hats. So let's make it a little more fun to do that. As we look at that, then we kind of have to think about, we have the culture that we defined, right? So if you think about the 4 different main kind of cultures you see in some of these different structures, we kind of wanted to become a clan. And in that sense, a lot of apprenticeship, a lot of close collaboration, open door policy. I think one of the first things I did was, my office has windows and a blind to the hallway. When I came in, they were all closed. So I open the door all the time. I keep the blinds open so people can see me. They can feel like they can access me and ask whatever question they have. So from that perspective, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I was available to them, and there's clear expectations, but hop on in if you have a question or a problem. And then from there, we talk about the next steps in the process would be, okay, so we've defined what we want the culture to be like. We've kind of given it a look and a feel in terms of openness and collaboration and not trying to hide issues. And then from there, it's really about how do we make it happen. So I think that kind of speaks to what we've talked about a little bit already, which is, what are the questions we have, and how can the data help us? How can connected data help us? How can Industry 4.0 solutions really bring us to that next level? And I think that's where the Industry 4.0 tools and everything out there can really help supplement it. But if you don't have that vision of where you're trying to get to, and you don't have that understanding of how to ask questions, how to answer questions, and get the so what from your data, it's kind of an exercise in futility at that point.
Yeah, that's great. No, I made a couple notes here. So openness, collaboration, and then creating a sense where we use data to make decisions. Did I capture that correctly?
Yeah. I think that's pretty straightforward. And I think one of the things I echo all the time here is, somebody comes in and says, I feel, or I think, or I see, and then I ask the question, what does the data say? I hear you, I believe you, but we just need to verify that and get some better data before we go make decisions on the fly. Unless it's urgent, then we have to make a call.
Yeah, one of the things that you said that I really connect with is making the problems visible. And one of the favorite phrases that I've heard from a customer over the years is he likes to make the ugly visible. If you sweep something under the rug, it tends to just stay there. But if you make it visible, if you make everybody see it as they walk past and so forth, there's a tendency for people to address it that way. And so that's part of what you said that I really connect with is, how do you make those things visible? How do you use that as a trigger to drive different behaviors that you're looking for?
Yeah, I definitely, it's something that's core to what I think. So I'm glad it resonates, and I'm glad it clicks, because I think back to the Alan Mullally story of Ford, right? He came in, I think, from Boeing, and they were, I think, $17 billion loss, and everybody was showing green at the business review, and kind of it begged the question of, okay, if we're all green, did we plan to lose 17 billion? And long and short of it is, when I joined here, I told people, I said, look, we're not going to hide issues anymore. We're not going to have meetings before the meetings to talk about the problems. Let's bring the Reds to the table. Let's celebrate where the Reds are. Then let's fix them so they don't keep happening. But let's never try to pretend everything's good if we're not getting what we want out of the process.
Yeah, we used to, it's hard in our culture for people to accept the fact that red is okay. And we used to use the phrase, red is your friend. Because when you have red, you now know you have an opportunity to make some sort of improvement. But culturally, that's not so easy to do. People aren't used to red being okay. Red means, oh my God, something's wrong.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to grade school where, red pen to correct your paper,
Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's where the leadership by example. Sorry to cut you off, Tim, but I think one of the first things I look to do was not to intentionally fail, but where I do have my shortcomings, or if I don't know something, to be transparent enough to say, look, I don't know it that well, or I admit a little bit of weakness that's not going to hurt anybody, not going to hurt the company, but at least acknowledge that we're all human, we're all trying our best, but we have to get better one day at a time.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we learned from lean manufacturing is when you have a problem, stop the process, understand why, address it, and then restart. And I think that, the red is just another signal for the business as a whole to understand what's happening and fix it and then move on. But to acknowledge that that problem exists in the first place so that it can be properly addressed.
And I think that's kind of the lens I definitely wanted to bring to the table, was the idea of, very simple lean implementation of what are our wastes, what are we valuing, what value are we adding, and how do we do more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. And
Yep.
If we celebrate when people come in and say, I need help, then people start to want to say I need help, because things do get better too. That's the flip side of the coin is once you start to make those improvements, then you get that momentum. So sometimes finding the most challenging group that doesn't think anything can get better, or sometimes it's just fixing the low hanging fruit and moving on to the harder stuff from there. But whatever works culturally to demonstrate the value is something to jump on right away, I'd say.
That's super. Just a quick aside before we get too far into our discussion today, I didn't mention earlier, but I'd like to right now. If you're listening in to us live, we'd love for you to engage with us. If you've got a question, please put it in the comment section on LinkedIn, and we'll be glad to try to answer that question to our broadcast today. So we've been talking a lot. We've talked a lot about culture, and a lot of things we just talked about aren't unique to Industry 4.0. They're just good culture points, right?
Mm-hmm.
Justin, from your perspective, is there such a thing as an Industry 4.0 culture?
I'd say eventually, yes. I think if you lead with, I'm going to build an Industry 4.0 culture, you might get sidetracked by some of the shiny, bright things. I think you could build a culture that needs that Industry 4.0 solution, right? It's thirsting for it at every meeting. It's asking the question of, well, what does this data say? Or, how do I solve this problem? And that's kind of where it's making the structure work so that people ask those questions, and building that culture of openness and inclusiveness. So people want to come in and say, look, I don't know, but if we build these processes together, we can make it better. So, for example, one of the big things we focused on here was building a culture of, we have to manufacture things. It takes materials and batch records and things to do that. When I first got here, there was a reluctantness to say we don't have the material or we're not ready to do it. And, we quickly tried to pivot to, okay, if you don't have it, that's fine. Tell us, and let's start getting more structure around that, getting it going. Then suddenly the question became, well, how can we track this better? So let's pull our data from the ERP system. Let's pull our schedule in. Let's tie this all together and create those commingled solutions that are a little bit more Industry 4.0 in terms of digitalizing the process and giving people access to that information on the fly. And out of nowhere, it took its own life and started to become its own initiative here, essentially. And everybody uses it now. Everybody engages with it, and they're asking for more from it. So by focusing on building that team, then we can make that Industry 4.0 culture really start to grow and become self-sustaining almost.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that is that you don't necessarily set out to build an Industry 4.0 culture. I think that you're trying to build a culture of accountability, database decision making, and what you'll discover over time is that once you have that culture established, people will find gaps in the data that exists today. And now Industry 4.0 becomes the solution to filling those gaps of what data do we not have in order to make those more informed decisions.
Yeah, Tim, I think that's a great point, right? Because sometimes you have that solution looking for a problem. But if you focus on the key problems first and solve those and use the Industry 4.0 approach, it can be entirely the game-changing approach for a company, especially a smaller to mid-sized company.
Yeah, I mean, one of my pieces of advice for small to mid-sized companies that are looking to get started with this is I'll ask the question, how well do you use data today in your operations? And a lot of times the answer is not very well. And my advice is even before you start to look for technology, focus in on how can you help the organization make better use of the data that exists today, because everybody has data somewhere. And it's, just a question of, how well do you have it instilled in your processes and in your behaviors of your people to utilize the information that is there. And if you can start to drive that, then over time, you can identify where the gaps exist and fill those with technology.
And I think it's a huge point for me, because I think if you do it that way, you really build some groundswell. And I think one of the key things I've seen in conjunction with that is, with that data, sometimes there are a few people who really know how to use it and know where it resides, and that's their source of power in the organization. So being cognizant of that, and working with those people, and really acknowledging that things might change, but their role won't be diminished. The data just gets to do more and help more for the company. That's something that's an important part of that culture, is to say this is collaborative in the sense that I want to celebrate what you've been doing, help make it easier, and help you do more. But not to make it so that I'm going to take it, or Industry 4.0 is now the solution and you were the problem the whole time.
Yeah. Well, what I like about what we're talking about, when I think about this issue of collaboration and making decisions with the data, you mentioned those in the past. A few might be the ones that have the data and don't share, but when you get into a collaborative environment, several things happen. One is, everybody has the same visibility of everything. But secondly, normally we have early adopters and late adopters, right? And those folks in the middle. If we're really collaborative, the early adopters help bring along the other folks, and no one feels left behind, because it can be a little bit intimidating, especially because people aren't used to new tools and new ways of doing things. Have you seen that kind of thing happening in your environment, Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to be very candid, one of the things I had to focus on when I first got here was who has influence, right? You talk about the formal structure, but then you also talk about that McKinsey social network analysis to understand who talks to whom and who has how many friends here at work. It sounds dumb, but sometimes it really does make sense to help the person who has the most friends, even if their problem might not be the biggest, because in overall value, you suddenly now have a champion. You have someone who can tell the story of what's been done, and how the improved analytics, the improved data connectivity has really helped their work, helped their day-to-day, and made their life easier. So it's kind of sometimes finding that person to address head on, that can be the champion, but might be the most reluctant, and go from there.
That's great. When I think about Industry 4.0, you've been at, I think, I'm sorry, I lose track, but you've been at your current role for 6 years now. Am I right?
It's about 2 years here, and 3 to 4 years.
2 years. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So even in 2 years, things have changed a lot. How has Industry 4.0 changed how you lead today versus maybe even in your previous role 8 years ago? How's it impacted your leadership style and your leadership practices?
So I think it kind of, in a weird way, it goes back to, I think, something Tim said, which is, the data is there, right? So if you operate on the assumption that the data is there, and you understand that there are problems, the question kind of becomes this fun thought exercise of, how do I get the data to solve the problems with the right people in the room? So from my perspective, it's sort of figuring out, okay, if we look at the end goal of satisfying the customer's needs, which is getting the product out the door, high quality and full, where are we missing on that? And you prioritize from that perspective. And then you take that Industry 4.0 mindset and say, what connected pieces aren't working together? So if I look at it, is the purchasing group talking to the manufacturing group, or to QC? Does QC know when material is coming to release it? Or is there a lack of visibility on the floor as to what's coming next, and we're not doing our changeovers on time? But from that perspective, I can take that mindset of the Industry 4.0 solution set, and really start to see, how can I get these things more connected so the data flows and it pushes to people, rather than having to have them seek it out or ask questions or get a personal interpretation of it from someone. So to answer your question more directly, the Industry 4.0 helps me be more targeted as a leader. It helps me be more precise in my solution sets, and not just try to kind of have a solution looking for a problem, but really start with the problem itself.
And what have you seen in the companies that you work with relative to leadership practices, and how Industry 4.0 has influenced them?
I think, sorry.
No, Tim, I'm sorry, just go ahead.
It's okay. I've seen leadership be absolutely critical. The projects where I've seen the most success have had very heavy leadership participation in there. One example that I use frequently is with a cosmetics manufacturer. And once they had a sufficient amount of data coming from the shop floor, he organized the entire leadership team into groups that worked with each of the different lines in the plant, and just did basically a 10-week improvement blitz where we went through and every single line had the responsibility of working with people in maintenance, people in management, whatever the team needed to be, to look at what were the three biggest problems for the previous time period, and how can we start to address what those biggest sources of downtime, biggest quality issues, whatever it might be, and just do that again and again. And what that did is built that habit within the organization of looking at the data. It built the habit of collaborating more tightly with one another, let people get to know each other in that problem solving kind of a role, and really involved all the people from the shop floor in that process as well. So you had full participation and kind of ownership throughout the organization from top to bottom of how to get going and moving forward with this. And it really built a lot of kind of muscle memory within the organization around using data to drive the improvements.
It's interesting. I've left Michelin a couple of years ago, but when we got started on Industry 4.0 on our journey to more intentionally use this technology to drive progress, the company really relied on a bottom-up approach in some ways. So the idea was to start and create a bunch of use cases, not force anybody to accept it, but create a bunch of use cases, standard use cases, because it's a very large company that people could then choose to implement. And then to try to create the environment where we gave individuals the opportunity to go to their biggest pain point, their biggest problem, and then pull the solutions they needed rather than do everything, because not everything else had the same impact. And I think that was really an important thing for to create a groundswell. The upside to that is it got a lot more involvement on the bottom up. The downside, of course, is maybe we didn't in some plants move as fast as we could have in others because there wasn't the same sort of challenge from leadership to go. Justin, in your environment, how do you balance that? Because you want that lower level involvement, but you also need to make progress, right? And we know this technology can be really, really value add. How have you seen that? How have you dealt with that balance of top down, bottom up?
Yeah, I think where I'm at now, it's a little more direct. We have a culture where we can sit down in the room, say we have a problem, and pretty quickly pivot and say, look, I think there's a solution that works if we do X, Y, and Z, put them together, something like that. Would you mind trying that? So when we do that, we get a pretty good success rate. I think it's the speed with which we can execute, and the size of the team makes it easier. Where I was before, I think it was a little more of the groundswell approach, and there was a little bit of reluctance at the top level just because it felt like it was, Justin's playing in Excel or Justin's doing data nerd stuff, and whatever you want to do, but just don't hold other people back. So what I found myself doing was sort of that building from the bottom up of working with groups and saying, look, I think there's a better way to do this. Let's build that tool and let's talk about it, or let's figure out the process that needs to happen and map the data that we need to pull in, and then give that to them. And not take that little bit of a low pressure approach like you were talking about to give them a chance to try it, to fail without having it impact the day to day or have significant expectations placed to the point where they're paralyzed by fear almost. So from that side of things, I think, when I have the ability at the top to influence that, I can make it happen pretty quickly. When I was doing it from the bottoms up, it was more of a, you can lead a horse to water type approach, but you can't always make it drink. So it's not going to be 100% successful in either direction, because top down isn't always the easiest way either. But it's about the individual situation and understanding how to influence, how to sell a little bit, how to demonstrate that value, and rapidly iterate on things to make them actually functional tools and processes.
Tim, how about you? What have you seen with your clients that you work with?
I think the bottom up approach can work, but I think that as management, you also want to model the behaviors that you want people to adopt. And so one great tool is, as you're doing your Gemba walk throughout the factory and so forth, bring a tablet with you And as you're walking the lines and so forth, take a look at the tablet before you go out to the floor, so you have already picked out some things that you want to ask people about. But show them that you're looking at the data, ask specific questions about what you're seeing within there, and people will soon learn that, hey, if they don't look at the data themselves, if they don't know what the answers to those questions are, then they're going to be on the spot. And so I think that in addition to the bottoms up approach, which helps drive ownership at the lower levels, gets people behind the initiative and gets them personally involved in that and motivated for it. I do think that if you can kind of subtly incent some of those things by doing those things yourself as a leader, and showing the people that, hey, you've adopted this, you're getting value from it, and kind of the expectations are that other people in the organization will also be looking at that information.
Yeah, I kind of go ahead, Justin.
Sorry, Tim, I was just saying, I think that's a fantastic point. Too many times I've seen, we're collecting downtime. Well, where's the downtime review? What are we doing to get better about it? Or, we have a shift report that has 3 different red blocks on it that we never talk about. So it kind of just becomes an exercise, and I'm doing this because I was told, but there's no actual value behind it.
Yeah, that's good. No, I kind of think of that. I kind of think about this like a sort of a push-pull scenario. You want folks to pull, but there's also a little bit of top-down push, and I think that push comes from a robust strategic plan or business plan, where you kind of state, hey, we want to use technology, we want to use to invest in the future and what can help us be more performant. So there's a way to kind of set that tone at the top, so that you go back to our point about culture, an opportunity for folks to understand that you're willing to invest in it and you're willing to support them as they use it. And I think there's kind of this push-pull. You can't just leave it for folks to pull, and you certainly can't dictate everything that needs to be done, because you don't live on the floor like the folks that do live on the floor. So at least that's my experience, kind of a push-pull.
I think it's I equate it to fishing for anybody who's been fishing. If you get a fish on a line and you're constantly reeling in, you're going to snap the line. But also conversely, if you never pull the fish in, you never get the fish. So you got to push, pull, and let it hang for a little bit, then bring it back in, but get it closer and closer to the boat, minute by minute or day by day.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a great analogy. So Justin, thinking back now to what you've accomplished with respect to Industry 4.0 in your own factory, I know it's been quite remarkable from things you've told us in the past. What steps would you recommend others take to build the Industry 4.0? I'll call it an ecosystem, but a culture or ecosystem for success.
I think the first thing is kind of getting your hands dirty, and kind of understanding the core issues that would drive a need for an Industry 4.0 solution, right? So this goes back to the comments about the Gemba walk, being out there with the people on the front line. What I've seen where these things have failed is somebody gives the edict that we need to go digital, but I'm not going to get involved. Or, we're going to bring in an outside consultancy and they're going to do everything. They're going to tell you what you need, and then they'll leave, and here's a tool that you should use now. And that's typically left with a scheduling tool that was unusable, or a process that made no sense, but they had to use it because the consultant said so, and we have a sunk cost bias once we pay for them. So, the first thing is get out there and understand your shop floor, understand the issues, and get into the corners, go into the dark spots of the warehouse, go to the shop, get out there after hours and see it all. And then from there, it's kind of that whole lean diagnostic, right? You don't have to go digital right off the bat. You can go out there and just look for the wastes and identify the value stream areas. From there, I think it's about understanding where would integrated data sets help you. Once you've categorized and prioritized the problems, I think it's really about, okay, would a tool help here, or is that overblown? Or can I tie this data together in such a way that it's useful? Or if I restructure it, does it provide that insight that I didn't have before? So, if you think about the shift report, that's a great example for me, where coming in here, we had a shift report. It wasn't being archived in the sense that we had any useful historical data. So we rapidly started doing that. And now we have almost 2 years worth of production data where I can go back, I can get, I can almost make control charts from it and basically say daily if we're, doing really well, if we're average, or if we're below average. So that's kind of the way I would go about it, is to understand where your issues are by getting out on the floor and learning, taking that top-down approach from there, making sure that maps appropriately, and then not trying to make everything digital all at once, but understanding where to tactfully deploy that and make it a smart use.
Tim, that sounds a lot like the approach we take for lean as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of similarities because, again, what you're really ultimately trying to do is to change the behaviors of your people, change the process itself, so become more efficient and remove the waste and so forth. The technology is a means to an end to identify that waste and to identify the causes for that waste. But it's still process and behavioral change to actually change the way that things are done out there. And so I think there's a lot of similarities to implementing lean processes and implementing digital digital lean or digital transformation processes.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. The the same principles apply, and ultimately, this is what we're trying to talk about here: is how lean and Industry 4.0 come together to really create. I would call it lean Industry 4.0 or digital lean, so that ultimately it's about getting results through these different tools. And I think it's the way you develop the culture we've been talking about that is pretty similar. Is similar whether you're talking about lean or Industry 4.0.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of lean practices are data based. Whether you're talking SBC or most anything else in lean, you want it to be based on data. Traditional lean does a lot with whiteboards and tick sheets and so forth, and this is really just automating that data collection process and also getting it a lot more granular and a lot more detail. But ultimately, a lot of those same things are going to be in play. You just have more to do it with.
I think that's kind of where that Hoshin Conway approach can play as well, where you don't have to go to the full massive exercise, but if you can do a light deployment of that kind of strategy deployment, translating that to goals and translating that to KPIs and things like that, that also helps me personally figure out where we have data gaps or where we have analysis gaps that we can fill in with Industry 4.0 tools.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tim.
Rewinding a little bit in terms of some of the levers that you have to kind of drive the behavioral change and so forth. A great place for me to, that I've seen work is stand-up meetings at the beginning of the shift. How do you run those? Are you actually utilizing data as a leader within those stand-up meetings? And are you talking about the problems from the previous shift, from the previous day, previous week, whatever it is, based on the data itself that you're collecting from whatever system you have in place? And I think that's another good lever that you can utilize because it is a broad-based communication and does get a lot of different people involved.
Yeah, that's great. So we've been talking now for the last 35 minutes or so about the importance of culture in terms of helping us to lead our Industry 4.0 deployment. And we've had some great conversations and Justin, you shared some good examples as well as Tim, things around how important it is to be open and genuine and collaborative and really how to use data to make decisions. As we kind of wrap up our conversation today, maybe we'll start with Tim and then go to Justin. What are your last thoughts on this that you might share with our audience that as a conclusion to our conversation?
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay. I think from my perspective, just thinking back to the premise of culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think you really do have to start with making a functional culture that works. And from my perspective, it does go back to Tim, like you talked about the lean mindset, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't have to get too far away or reinvent the wheel here. You just build something that works. The respect for people will carry you pretty far, actually, in that sense. And like you said, the personal accountability as well as the organizational accountability to use the data, use the tools. From there, the problems come to you. When people feel that they're being listened to, when people feel, that the organization is trying to do something right, they'll come to you with solutions or with at least an issue that they think could get better. And that's where the onus switches to the leadership team to really take that and run with that. And then find, is it an Industry 4.0 solution or is it something else? But doing the right things from there to rapidly address those. So, if you think about that as a cultural underpinning, it's really hard to go wrong there. And then everything else kind of falls into place from that perspective.
Thank you, Justin. Tim?
Yeah, I think that the basics of change management are absolutely in play here. How do you encourage participation? How do you identify those early adopters that Justin referenced earlier? Standard change management practices and so forth, communication are absolutely critical. I think that you have to have a mindset of what are the habits that you want to instill and be very intentional about that, and think through as you're doing the implementation, what are those habits that you want to instill, and how do you provide motivation for those habits? How do you provide people that have the ability to actually execute those habits? And how do you prompt those behaviors that you're looking for? One of the keys in Lean is standard work. And I think that standard work is heavily intertwined with what we're talking about here. And, what are the different leadership standard work practices that you want to build into that process as well? And kind of the last thing I would touch on is there's definitely, kind of a big brother aspect that you have to worry about as well as you go down this path. And there are, people that are going to have, kind of fear about being watched and data being collected about them and so forth. And I think you just have to address those things up front and be open about why you're putting these things in place, as opposed to leaving that for people's imagination.
Thank you. Those are two really great insights you guys have shared. So thanks for helping us out today. So I want to take a moment and thank both Tim and Justin for taking their time out to join us for this broadcast. As we reach our conclusion today, this is the first episode in a series that we're launching called Lean Industry 4.0, Operational Excellence Meets Technology. And we want to do something different. We're going to be doing this series throughout the second quarter. We'd like to do something different with this series that we haven't done before. We would invite you, like you, our listeners, to join us as part of our conversation, much like we used to in our days on Clubhouse. So what you'll see on our LinkedIn page and our website shortly is a chance to apply to be a speaker on one of our future broadcasts. We'll outline each of our broadcasts. Please fill out the short questionnaire. We'll get that, and hopefully we'll have you on if you're interested in one of our future broadcasts. We really want to engage a broad audience and really bring everybody together to share the importance of what we're talking about today and in the future. So if you like what the Industry 4.0 Club does, we host conversations like this on Tuesdays and Wednesdays around themes related to women in manufacturing, the future of manufacturing, fireside chat, and people, process, and culture. We also, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, do some live programming. We're going to be at Manufacturing X.0 Southeast, which will be in Greenville, South Carolina on April 17th and 18th, just a couple weeks from now. And we're also going to be at IME South, which will be in Charlotte, North Carolina, on between June 4th and June 6th. So we hope that you'll come meet with us and join us at those sites as well. If you like what you hear, also please join our LinkedIn page, and of course visit our website at www.industry4lclub.com. We also put out a weekly newsletter, and we hope that you'll subscribe to that. So again, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Tim. It's been great having you guys on to talk about this topic today, about the importance of culture in the deployment of Industry 4.0. And wish you guys a great rest of the week, and everybody as well who's listening. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tim.